with my family, as you can see.
And you too, Mrs. Chapman?
Very, very pleased, yes.
Is it a good flight?
Yes, not bad, quite comfortable, thanks.
And no problems getting out this time, obviously?
No, all went very smoothly.
But had he recovered from the beating he received?
I'm feeling fine, personally. Just looking forward to some rest and recreation, get away from it all, wind down, relax, and look forward to the next thing, whatever that may be.
And what will life be like now for those diplomats left behind?
I really don't want to, I really wouldn't want to go into that with that friends of mine.
The Foreign Office say there are 13 British diplomats remaining in Tehran and that the situation there is tense. But for the chaplains, a relaxed airport reunion with relatives before setting off for Cambridge and a few days' rest at the home of Mrs. Chaplin's parents. And tonight at Heathrow, the Iranian charge d'affaires, Mr. Bashti, was on hand to farewell 4 of the 5 Iranian diplomats from Manchester expelled by Britain. Vernon Mann, News at 10 at Heathrow Airport.
Here, a convicted rapist has been jailed for 14 years for attempting to murder Cathy Humphrey, the 10-year-old Kent girl who was stabbed and left badly wounded in the snow. Kelvin Chapman stabbed Cathy 6 times in the chest and the stomach. Mr. Justice Farquharson said it was about as wicked a crime as one could conceive.
10-year-old Cathy Humphrey went out on a shopping errand and fell victim to Kelvin Chapman. Claiming he was on drugs, he told police he had a pathological hatred of his wife. He said, "Cathy became my wife." Chapman forced her into his hired car, saying, "Are you ready or your head will roll?" She screamed and struggled, and eventually he stopped the car. It was then he started a frenzied attack with a kitchen knife, stabbing her repeatedly, snapping the blade off.
This knife blade was in Catherine's coat and fell out of it when she left the car. The handle itself, Chapman told us he'd thrown it from the car at a railway bridge.
Cathy managed to crawl along an alleyway before being found bleeding in the snow. She kept asking, "Am I going to die?" Her family spent a fortnight of anguish by her hospital bedside before hearing she would survive. Today, a court heard how she was scarred for life, both physically and mentally, by the man who left his fingerprints on Cathy's shopping bag. He was traced after police contacted the firm which hired out his car. Mr. Justice Farquharson was told that Chapman had served a 3-year sentence for raping a 15-year-old girl before the attack on Cathy. He said it was only due to the skill of a medical team at the Kent and Canterbury Hospital that he wasn't before the court charged with murder. Andrew Simmons, News at 10, Maidstone Crown Court.
More than 1 million people have taken part in the first open-air mass of the Pope's visit to Poland. There were several solidarity banners among the crowd. Earlier, the Pope made a pilgrimage to a former Nazi extermination camp.
It was the most solemn and poignant moment of the Pope's visit here. He came to Majdanek concentration camp to pay tribute to the 1.5 million Jews and Poles who died here at the hands of the Nazis. For 7 minutes, he knelt in silent prayer. Majdanek has been preserved as a museum. In the history of the Holocaust, only Auschwitz has a worse record. The ashes of thousands of its victims are still kept in this huge mausoleum. One survivor was there to greet the Pope. She was a hospital worker who incredibly lived through both Majdanek and Auschwitz. This afternoon, the more familiar sights of the Pope-mobile and the open-air mass held in front of 1 million of his fellow countrymen. There was still evidence here of support for the banned trade union Solidarity, though it was carefully not shown on Polish television. But if any doubted it, this trip again proved that Pope John Paul has lost none of his popularity in this intensely Catholic country.
More than 50 people were arrested in East Berlin after the 3rd day of fighting between police and rock fans near the Berlin Wall. 4,000 fans had gathered near the Brandenburg Gate to listen to a concert near the old Reichstag, when the police moved in.
It was late in the afternoon when the crowd started to gather behind the Brandenburg Gate in East Berlin. All they wanted to do was listen to a concert featuring Phil Collins and the British band Genesis, which was taking place just 200 yards on the other side of the Berlin Wall. The concert was the latest in a series which has included the Eurythmics and David Bowie, all designed to celebrate Berlin's 750th anniversary. But as night fell, the crowd in East Berlin turned their attention away from the music and towards politics, chanting, "The wall must go." For the 3rd night running, the border guards moved in. Over 50 arrests were made. The East Germans claim the concerts are a Western attempt to provoke trouble in Berlin. They deny any violence took place. With East Berlin authorities planning their own celebrations for the city's anniversary, it's clear that these demonstrations have already caused considerable embarrassment.
Cricket, the rain won again today. 7 of the 8 county matches in the Britannic Assurance Championship were washed out and the test match was abandoned as a draw.
Soccer, John Barnes has finally made up his mind he's going to Liverpool for £900,000. Liverpool had told Watford they were withdrawing their offer after waiting 3 months. But Barnes turned up at Anfield today with the Liverpool manager, Mr. Kenny Dalglish, and said he'd given up any idea of moving abroad. He said Liverpool had been his first choice all along. The deal should go through later this week.
The main news again. Tonight in Harrogate, Mrs. Thatcher said Labour meant a second-class life and a third-class country. Mr. Kinnock said only a vote for Labour could prepare the earth for the next generation, and Mr. Steele told an Alliance rally in London that the poll showed beyond doubt that Labour cannot now win the election.
Finally, they were singing in the rain outside Covent Garden tonight. Opera lovers were treated to a free performance of La Bohème, with Placido Domingo relayed live into the square.
Those arriving tonight at the front of the Opera House paid up to £42 for their tickets to see the great Spanish tenor Placido Domingo sing. But on the big screen round the corner, pictures relayed from inside for the crowds waiting in the rain for their free performance. Opera for the masses has become something of an obsession for Domingo.
No, because opera needs more public, you know, tickets you cannot get. But I think that the public deserves opera. I think the public, a lot of people want to participate, a lot of people want to see opera and they are not able to see it.
When the singing started, even the rain stopped to listen. And the crowds, 2,000 strong or more, looked as though they were transported somewhere far away from the grey London evening. Placido Domingo's biggest opponent in the cause of open-air free opera for the British music lover is, of course, the British weather. But the promised reward for the hardy audience out here is a curtain call in front of the screen by Placido Domingo and the cast in full costume. Gabby Rado, News at 10, Covent Garden.
And just 48 hours to go before we should know the election result on ITV's Vote 87. That's it. Good night.
I'm Kevin Dunn with Margaret Thatcher for Vote 87.
With Neil Kinnock, I'm Jon Snow reporting for Vote 87. Here's Michael Macmillan.
I'm covering David Steele for Vote 87. ITN's Paul Davis is with David Owen.
Together we'll be providing full coverage of the party leaders for ITN's Vote 87.
Good evening. Just before Campaign 87, the Thames News headlines. The firm at the centre of the dispute at Smithfield Meat Market, who've been trying to break established union rules, have threatened to pull out after the breakdown of talks tonight. Discussions have been going on all day at the Conciliation Service ACAS between Allied meat importers and the Transport and General Workers Union. Today, AMI started trading despite a picket. They've been in dispute with the union for 3 weeks over their decision to choose their own porter. Talks will resume tomorrow between the union and the Markets Residents Association over the long-term future of Smithfield. A report by the Inner London Education Authority's Chief Schools Inspector says that poor quality teaching is responsible for underachievement in nearly all of Inner London's secondary schools. The report says that lessons are dull and tedious and claims that any chance of improvement is being hampered by continuing industrial action. Today, thousands more pupils were sent home in the Thames area because of more half-day strikes over pay negotiating rights. Relatives of 3 British tourists killed on a coach trip in Spain have criticised the travel company Thomson Holidays for dragging its feet over compensation. An inquest today recorded a verdict of accidental death on Wilfred Davies and his wife Valerie from Enfield and Victor Wood from Oxford. Their coach hit the back of a lorry at Tarragona last June. The inquest heard the driver had been talking to a passenger. An inquiry is opened into plans to build houses and industry on one of the last remaining marshlands in the London area. Developers want to build on a third of the 460-acre site at Crayford Marshes in Erith, with the rest of the land given to sport and recreation. But conservationists are opposed, saying the area is a haven for wildlife. For some birds, such as the redshank, it's said to be one of the last places in Britain to live and breed.
Stephen Hickling, the policeman who lost an arm and nearly lost his sight in a bomb blast at Catford Police Station 7 years ago, has turned a hobby that helped him recover into a successful business venture. He lost his police job and went into partnership with a friend to open a shop specialising in Japanese fish. It's been so successful that on the opening day there were 600 customers. Fishermen from Australia and the United States were among the 250 competitors trying their luck today in what was billed as the largest ever fly fishing competition. They were trying to lure 100,000 brown and rainbow trout at the Queen Mother Reservoir at Datchet in Berkshire. Actor Bernard Cribbins was among the contestants raising money for Wexham Park Hospital at the charity event. And Thames weather. Tonight, staying showery. Tomorrow, brighter and drier, but still some rain. Warmer at 16 degrees Celsius, that's 61 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for now. We'll have more Thames news tomorrow. Now, Campaign 87.
Good evening and welcome to the last Campaign 87 programme. Now tomorrow night you'll be free to go to bed early. Tonight we'll be hearing from the political wives about their campaign. Glenys Kinnock, Debbie Owen and Sheila Moore, the wife of the Transport Secretary.
And with Mrs Thatcher back early from the Venice summit, I'll be asking Michael Heseltine and others about the Gulf, the Russians, the Americans and about poverty as well, not at home but abroad.
We'll be looking at the startling latest polls, at the crucial moments and gaffes of the election campaign, and we go on the campaign trail in Slough.
Sorry, I haven't told you this before. This is sorry.
You do, go on.
You do stop a little lot too long with most people. It's very difficult to get away when someone's asking a question.
Well, I'll tell you what to do, Jack.
You get
somebody gets me into
I'll
come over and say, oh, Mike,
right,
somebody,
right,
because that is a bit of a problem.
I do, but you're so involved, mate.
Well,
You're so involved.
I'm interested.
I know, of course, we all are.
Okay.
More of that later, but in the meantime, what's it like picking up the papers and reading that your husband's a liar, a traitor, or just plain incompetent? Politicians' wives have to get used to that, particularly at election time. They also have to get used to a punishing schedule, so that today I had to scour the country to find them. I asked Glenys Kinnock in Leeds how she reacted to nasty personal abuse of her husband.
Well, it would be silly to say I enjoy it, and a lot of it is vicious and is totally unnecessary and oughtn't to be a part of a campaign which is about promoting policies and about talking about people's lives and how desperate people are. But apart from that, I mean, I think the main impression will be not of attacks on Neil, but of actually people saying how well he's done and what a fantastic campaign he's fought. So that'll really be the impression people will have.
Do you nonetheless have to develop something of a thick skin in that regard?
I think you do, and certain people's opinions tend not to matter a great deal to you. So, and certain newspapers' opinions are what you'd expect them to be. So I think that you just have to take the rough with the smooth, and generally that hasn't been the overwhelming feeling that you've had. It has been one of great personal warmth.
Are there any times when you feel in some sense a bit kind of used? I mean, we know how politicians kiss babies. Don't they rather hug wives in the same kind of way?
I don't get that, no. I certainly have had a great deal of good feeling towards me. I haven't had a great deal of hugging, physical hugging, although I wouldn't mind that either. But
I meant from Neil, really, not from other people.
From Neil?
Yes.
Oh, I don't mind.
I mean, for, you know, for the press rather than...
That doesn't occur. I think when, for instance, at the end of a rally or at a time when we both are feeling emotional, and we both do feel emotion naturally, and I don't see that it's necessary to hide it on those occasions. And if he feels like putting his arms around me and giving me a hug because he feels emotional, then that's fine. That's what he ought to do, whether the press are there or not.
Aren't you, meanwhile, worrying about home and the kids and feeding them and so on?
Oh, naturally. I mean, the anxieties that are always there about me. Last night, instead of going home, I went to a Red Wedge concert in Nottingham. So one of my main worries was whether Stephen had his packed lunch this morning and what he was going to find in the fridge to make it with. So those are the nitty-gritty things of everyday life, which I still have to think about. But they're 15 and 17, very resilient and also enjoying the campaign.
Debbie and Sheila Moore, I was talking to Glenys Kinnock in Leeds earlier this afternoon. Can I now put it to you, Debbie Owen, how do you react to the kind of vicious personal abuse that is thrown about during campaigns and at other times in politics? Abuse of your husband?
I think it was difficult when he was Foreign Secretary, perhaps because I was younger, but also it was more vicious because it was so focused on Rhodesia and there was a lot of sort of racial implications. That was a difficult time for me. Now, I can't say there has been any one thing that has made me truly upset. I mean, you get angry and irritated, but the big question is, does it last until the next day?
Do you take it personally? Does it hurt?
Well, I feel rather lucky. My husband has so far, touch wood, not been subjected to vicious personal abuse. What my husband keeps getting is how handsome he is. And ladies, you keep saying, what a gorgeous husband.
Well, I better not comment on that. Let me go on to ask you whether there's any sense in which, and I note that you're both Americans in this regard, where we see wives and children trundled around all the time in election campaigns. Do you feel you're trundled around for the photographers, for television cameras?
Well, I feel very lucky. I just said earlier, shall I say this again, that I felt this was an ominous precedent that Deborah and I were being trundled on now, because usually, blessedly, British politics don't involve the wives, except just as runners on the doorstep. We've been relieved of that, and I shall be a little sorry if it changes.
You don't find, Debbie, you're the sort of object of the publicity man?
No.
You're being handled, used by.
No, but I think that my situation's quite different. I have a job that I work very hard at, normally when I haven't taken a month off to be down in Plymouth. And I think that people respect the fact that you don't have to be Mrs. David Owen all the time.
Do the parties themselves, I wonder, both your parties and the other, respect women enough in the sense of, are there enough women candidates this time around?
Well, I don't know how Sheila feels, but I feel passionately that there needs to be more women in the House of Commons. When I go to listen to a debate and look down at 650 men and 28 women, it is absurd. And even though I don't want to be one of them because it isn't my strength, I know that there are many more Rosie Barneses out there, probably from all the parties, who would make a terrific contribution.
I was going to ask you whether you wanted to be a politician, but you don't. What
Not
about
at all, no.
Sheila?
Well, no, not myself. No, the Nancy Astor precedent of taking over your husband's seat is not for me.
But what about the role of women? Some people would argue that it's pretty peripheral still in British politics.
What do you mean?
Do you mean there are too... I'm asking whether you think there are too few women in...
Well, I'm sure that Deborah's right.
candidacy.
Yes, and I get exactly the same impression looking down at that sea of masculine faces. It's interesting, though, when one goes back to America, one realizes that the British have made an enormous mental leap that the Americans have yet to make. Until the present Prime Minister, there were an awful lot of people who didn't think women could do it. That question is no longer asked in Britain. They can unquestionably do it, depending on the women. In America, there still is a question, isn't there? Could women actually do it?
So what now in Britain in this campaign do either of you see as your key role? Is it to sustain your husband morally, to keep him fed, to what?
Well, no, in my case, because David is the leader of the STP, I'm based in his constituency in Plymouth, which he's represented for 21 years. So it's very important that I be there. When he can't be, he comes twice a week. But the rest of the time, I'm following a program quite similar to what he'd do, but in a sense, doing it my way.
And you, Sheila?
Very much a supporting role. Somebody has to, at a time of terrific stress like this, be the person that finds a hot meal and dry socks and is there with the right papers and answers the telephone. And I don't mind at all, because it means you are in the thick of it, and I rather like it.
In a word, each of you in turn, how will you cope with defeat if it comes, either in the constituency or nationally?
I do not anticipate defeat.
You're bound to say that.
I think one lives for the moment.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Impressive political spouses. And as this is our last campaign programme, we've been looking back to see how their husbands have fared as well. Michael's been picking out some of the highs and lows of the last 3 weeks to assess where the gaffes were made and which were the decisive moments.
I'm telling you, you can't play politics with people's jobs and with people's services.
Labour had one main objective, which was to promote the character of the leader, Neil Kinnock, and that, I think, they've done very well.
Ours is a country with a past to be proud of, and under the Conservatives, it will be a country with a future to be proud of.
For the Conservatives, it was much more of a conservative, conserving campaign. Hold the high ground, we're doing well, Britain is doing better, don't jeopardise it.
We've left the 4-0 Labour Party still in the starting blocks.
They're still addressing the faithful at party conferences.
The Alliance made, I think, the only party that I would say really made a major strategic error right from the start, and that was to attack the Tories because they wrote off the Labour Party.
There were a number of gaffes in the course of the campaign. Was Mrs. Thatcher thinking about running as Prime Minister for life?
Yes, I hope to go on and on.
Tough luck, chaps. I'm stuck here till 1997. Oh.
Mr. Tebbit was reminded of a tape recording relating back to employment promises in 1983. And the SNP jogged Mrs. Thatcher's memory about unemployment in 1977.
Sometimes I've heard it said that Conservatives have been associated with unemployment. Well, that's absolutely wrong. We'd have been drummed out of office if we'd had this level of unemployment.
Mrs. Thatcher wasn't the only one to be embarrassed by a TV appearance.
And this is the classical choice of either exterminating everything that you stand for, and I'll use the phrase, the flower of your youth, or using the resources you've got to make any occupation totally untenable.
Isn't that nice? If we win, Gorbachev, his cabinet, and the whole Russian army will be arriving in Britain on June the 12th to congratulate us.
When Kinnock made the gaffe on the Frost show and defined Labour defence policy in a way which could be interpreted, I think misinterpreted, but interpreted in a way, as guerrilla bands in the Welsh Hills holding off the might of the Soviet army, then really the Conservative Party machine had to go in action somewhat before its time, and probably peaked a little early. With the result now that one sees Neil Kinnock and other Labour Party people getting their act together on defence.
I, along with, I think, something like 5 million other people, yes, do ensure to enable me to go into hospital on the day I want.
I mean, Mrs. Thatcher's made one or two gaffes about the way she responded to why she used private health insurance, muddle over Mr. Kenneth Baker's educational policies, letting the schools opt out of the state system and so on. But I don't think any of the parties have made the kind of gaffes that historians will look back at and say, she lost the election then, or he lost the election then. I think on the whole, the gaffes have all been fairly minor scale.
But the dual leadership of the alliance was to prove much more damaging than any slip-ups by their opponents.
I think the alliance obviously had a great albatross around their necks in having two leaders. That wasn't so much a gaffe as something that is inherent in their in the way that they want to run the alliance politics. I mean, they don't want to merge, and therefore, once you had two leaders trailing around the country like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, I think it really looked rather ridiculous.
This way, David.
Oh, no, this way, David.
When they broke up, when they stopped the Tweedledum and Tweedledee problem, they had a second problem, which was that David Steele appears to be somewhat on the left and David Owen appears to be somewhat on the right. And so part of the story then became which one is telling the alliance line.
This has been the most heavily polled election ever. Before the campaign began, the Alliance had heady dreams of being the second party in terms of votes, and some polls even gave credence to the dream. But in no time at all, they were firmly locked into third place, and that's where they've stayed ever since. For Labour, the early polls produced a whiff of victory. There was real elation as they picked up point after point. But there was always one spirit-sapping fact. The Tories were solid on more than 40%. It was the third week of the campaign that sent the jitters through party headquarters. The Alliance, who'd confidently predicted they'd climb back as they did in 1983, found themselves stuck on the lower slopes. There was a real fright for the Tories, as two polls, one for BBC's Newsnight, another for the Daily Telegraph, suggested they might have lost their battle for the decisive marginals to Labour. But Labour's optimism was quickly to be dented once more, and with just 32 hours to go before the poll that really matters, the three parties are said to be back where they started. David Butler is referring there to the Tories' vote staying solid. But despite that, do you think that the very latest polls and past experience indicates that it's by no means too late for a significant swing?
Well, there's a difficulty that there is a conflict in evidence. The national polls are staying pretty solid, perhaps a slight slippage for the Conservatives, but the two polls today put them 7% and 8% ahead of the two polls coming out tomorrow morning, which have just been released. Whereas the marginals polls give a different story, and some regional polls from Wales and from Anglia and from the West Midlands, there have been news of the Labour Party making substantial progress. Rather less good news for the Labour Party from London. But there is the conflict evidence. And then tonight, there's a story which I suppose will make the headlines tomorrow, and that is the BBC Newsnight poll, which is on a rather grand scale, which does suggest that at last, at the very last, and there was really significant movement towards tactical voting. And in Conservative Labour marginals, Alliance voters are switching over to Labour, and in Conservative Alliance marginals, Labour voters are switching over to the Alliance. And this will actually probably up the Alliance vote a bit in the last phase.
Well, of course, we've said all along, in the very first campaign 87, we said that it was the marginals that were crucial. So I come back to the question, there is a chance of a crucial swing almost towards perhaps Hung Parliament?
Yes, except that I'm fundamentally sceptical about these marginals polls. They do say something slightly different, but they conflict with each other. They can't all be right. The national polls can all be right within the acceptable margin error. The marginals polls, the regionals polls, and even the constituency polls can't all be right. There have been polls in, for example, Cambridge, showing all three parties in different orders in three different polls, and it just, something is wrong there. So I think we'd better probably, if we're predicting, we'd be safer sticking to the national polls. But the national polls are not all over. They've been wonderfully stable, but it is worth remembering that in 3 of the last 5 elections, there have been really big moves in the last 2-3 days of the campaign, moves of 3 and 4%. And so it is not inconceivable, if the Conservatives were genuinely 7% ahead on Sunday night, that they will only be 3% ahead next Thursday, and that would mean a hung Parliament.
So what do you think, in these terms of the last 2 days, could swing it one way or another? A gaffe? A new issue coming to the fore?
We're getting more or less beyond the point of no return. There hasn't actually been a real major gaffe. I think the Conservatives have slipped a little on the health issue in the last few days, but there hasn't been a major gaffe, and by tomorrow it's